On the night of March 25, 1968, something extraordinary happened in Memphis, Tennessee. Over 10,000 people, sanitation workers, their families and supporters, packed into the Bishop Charles Mason Temple. They weren't just there for a meeting, they were there for a survival cry. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. arrived to a thunderous standing ovation that lasted for minutes. For an American audience today, it is important to understand that this was one of the largest indoor gatherings of the movement. The air was thick with hope and the desperate need for change. When Dr. King took the podium on March 25th, he delivered a message that still resonates in the heart of every hardworking American. He famously declared that all labor has dignity. He challenged the idea that some jobs are lowly and others are high. He looked at the sanitation workers, men who were often ignored or looked down upon, and told them that their work was as essential as a doctor's. He argued that if the person who picks up our trash stops working, our society stops functioning. By saying this, he gave these men back their pride. He shifted the conversation from just race to human value. This date, March 25th, marked a radical shift in Dr. King's mission. He realized that it wasn't enough to have the right to sit at a lunch counter if you didn't have the money to buy a burger. He called for a united front and urged the community to engage in a massive boycott. He told the people of Memphis to stop buying from businesses that didn't treat black workers fairly. This was the heart of his Poor People's Campaign. He was no longer just a dreamer. He was a leader demanding a fair share of the American economy for the people who built it with their hands. While the crowd was energized, Dr. King was carrying a heavy burden. He was exhausted, and the threats against his life were increasing daily. Yet, on this night, he chose to stand with the poor. He told the crowd that he would return in a few days to lead a massive march through the streets of Memphis, which happened on March 28th. This decision to stay and fight in Memphis was his final act of courage. He knew the risks were high, but his love for the least of these was stronger than his fear of death. For a modern USA audience, March 25th is a reminder that the American dream must include everyone, from the office worker to the street sweeper. Dr. King's speech that night wasn't just about 1968. It was a blueprint for how we should treat each other today. It teaches us that every person deserves a living wage and, more importantly, unconditional respect. The journey that began on March 25th remains unfinished, but the light Dr. King lit that night in Memphis continues to guide everyone who believes in justice and the simple, profound dignity of being a human being. On the rainy evening of March 25, 1968, the Bishop Charles Mason Temple in Memphis became the spiritual capital of America. Over 10,000 people, mostly sanitation workers who had been humiliated, underpaid, and ignored, gathered in a space meant for far fewer. The atmosphere was electric, a mix of weary exhaustion and desperate hope. When Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stepped onto the pulpit, the roar of the crowd wasn't just a welcome, it was a collective cry for justice. For an American audience today, this night represents the moment when the civil rights movement evolved into a human rights crusade. Dr. King wasn't just there to give a speech, he was there to resurrect the spirit of a broken people. The heart of Dr. King's message on March 25th was a direct challenge to the American class system. He looked into the eyes of men who spent their days hauling heavy, leaking tubs of trash, men who were called boys by their supervisors, and he gave them a new identity. He famously declared, "Whenever you are engaged in work that has dignity for the soul and represents a contribution to the community, it has dignity." He went further, explaining that the physician is no more important than the man who picks up the garbage. Because if the sanitation worker doesn't do his job, the physician's hospital becomes a breeding ground for disease. By saying this, Dr. King redefined the American dream. He argued that a nation's greatness is measured not by its wealth, but by how it treats the people who perform its most essential and difficult tasks. This wasn't just politics. It was a moral earthquake. Dr. King understood that words alone would not change the stubborn hearts of the Memphis city officials. On that night of March 25th, he called for a total economic withdrawal. He urged the black community to stop spending their hard-earned money at downtown stores that refused to hire black clerks or support fair wages. He taught the audience that their greatest power wasn't just their vote, but their purchasing power. He wanted to hit the system where it hurt, in the pocketbook. This was the core of his Poor People's Campaign. He was building a multiracial coalition of the poor to demand a redistribution of economic power. To a modern USA audience, this is a reminder that Dr. King was a radical thinker who believed that true freedom is impossible without economic security. He wanted a world where a living wage was a guaranteed right, not a distant hope. While Dr. King's voice was strong, his heart was heavy. By March 25th, he had been under constant surveillance by the FBI, his life was threatened daily, and he was physically exhausted from years of nonstop struggle. Yet, in Memphis, he found a new fire. He chose to delay his plans in Washington, D.C., to stay with the least of these in Memphis. He knew that if he could win this battle for the sanitation workers, he could prove that nonviolence was still the most powerful weapon for social change. His decision to lead the upcoming march on March 28th was a calculated risk. He was stepping into a lion's den of racial tension, but his commitment to ahimsa, nonviolence, was unwavering. He told the crowd that night that they must remain united, for nothing is more powerful than a coordinated, dedicated, and committed people. Why does March 25th, 1968, matter to us today? Because the journey is still unfinished. When we see essential workers today struggling for health care or a fair wage, we are seeing the same struggle that Dr. King championed in Memphis. The mission of March 25th was to remind America that every human being is made in the image of God and deserves to be treated with unconditional respect. Dr. King didn't just want the workers to get a raise. He wanted the world to see their humanity. He wanted a sanitation worker to be able to stand tall and say, "I am a man." As we look back at those final days, we realize that Dr. King wasn't just a leader of the past, he is a voice for our future. The Memphis mission is now our mission, to ensure that no one is forgotten, no work is disrespected, and the journey toward justice never stops until every person can live with true dignity. On the night of March 25th, Dr. King didn't just speak to the mind, he spoke to the weary soul of a nation. He understood that the sanitation strike was a microcosm of the entire American struggle. He challenged the audience to look beyond their own pain and see the universal truth. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. To an American audience today, this is the most profound part of his Memphis mission. He was teaching us that we are all tied together in a single garment of destiny. By standing with the men who cleaned the streets, he was proving that a society is only as strong as its most vulnerable member. He wasn't just asking for a raise in pay. He was asking for a raise in the American consciousness. By March 25th, Dr. King was facing immense pressure from his own advisors to leave Memphis and focus on the National Poor People's Campaign in Washington, D.C. They feared the rising tensions in the city. But King's heart was anchored in Memphis. He looked at the faces of the 10,000 people in that temple, people who had been told their whole lives that they didn't matter, and he made a choice. He chose to delay his national plans to stand in the trenches with the poor. This decision was a testament to his radical empathy. He knew that if he abandoned Memphis, he would be abandoning the very principles of his faith. For the American people, this act of staying reflects the true meaning of leadership. It is not about the spotlight. It is about the sacrifice. Conclusion. On the night of March 25th, 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stood before 10,000 workers in Memphis and reminded America that all labor has dignity. He argued that the person who picks up our garbage is just as important as a doctor because without them, our society cannot survive. This was the heart of his unfinished journey, a fight to prove that every hard-working American deserves a living wage and unconditional respect. Even though he was taken from us just days later, his message from that night remains a powerful call to action, that the American dream is only real when it belongs to everyone, from the office to the streets. If you're inspired by Dr. King's legacy, make sure to like and subscribe to this channel, where I'm dedicated to bringing you the true stories behind the powerful life and journey of Martin Luther King Jr. Don't forget to hit the bell icon and share this video to help keep the dream alive. Thanks for watching.